Hi everyone, it's Alexis with Project Management Made Simple. In this video, I'm going to answer the question, how do you perform a risk assessment? Now this video is going to focus on planning for negative risks, which are also known as threats. I have a video where I go into detail explaining how to identify risks. I will have that linked below. And in this video, I'm going to build upon that video and go into more detail about the subsequent steps that you should take when you are performing a risk assessment. So after we have our risks identified, we want to look at assessing the impact to the project if this risk turns into an issue. And depending on your organization, there's various ways that you can quantify this, either by using numeric values, 0.1 or 0 to 1, for either the impact or the probability. And then you can also do things like using a scale of low, medium, high. Really just depends on your organization's needs as well as the project's needs in particular. And so this scale can be applied to assessing the impact as well as the next step, which is assessing the probability. And when we're assessing the impact, we want to look at what is going to happen if this risk turns into an issue. If it comes to fruition, what is going to be the impact to the project? Similarly, we want to look at what is the probability? What's the likelihood of this risk coming to fruition? If it does turn into an issue, what are the chances of that? So multiplying these two factors together, looking at the impact and the probability is going to give us what's called our severity. And the severity gives us a clear indicator of how we can prioritize addressing each of these risks. Next, we get into our risk responses, where there are 4 options here. The first one is to avoid a risk entirely. You can also transfer a risk. You can mitigate a risk, which is to lessen its impact to a project if it does become an issue. Or you can potentially accept a risk. Now, I haven't really seen many projects where a risk is just accepted, but there are cases where that's possible. So it's important to be privy to these various risk responses that you have at your disposal just to determine what is best for in addressing that particular risk. To give you all an example, if I have the risk on a project that I have a resource that is split across 2 projects, the risk would look like if this resource has to work on this other high priority project and has to work on tasks and ends up missing deadlines for this project, then what is the impact going to be? So I would look at what tasks are they working on? Are those tasks on the critical path? If they are on the critical path, so the impact is going to be however many days, however many hours it goes past the set time that we originally had allocated for those tasks is going to add onto the project as a whole. Critical path is a whole nother video entirely, but really in essence, it's just looking at what are those activities that cannot slide beyond their deadline. Otherwise, they will have an impact on the final deadline of the project. So that would be a high priority. If they're working on tasks that are on the critical path, then the impact to that is going to be high. Now, we also want to look at the probability. What's the likelihood of this becoming an issue? If the likelihood of this turns out to be low, well, then that's great. And so next thing we'll look at is severity. And we want to multiply these two. Like I said before, if you're using numeric values, you can multiply the 2. Otherwise, in the example that I'm giving you all, if I have a high impact and I have a low probability, my severity more than likely is going to be medium, and that is going to drive the risk response. So looking at those 4 risk responses that we potentially have, we can go through all of our risks. In this example, we have the 1 here, and we can see what is most appropriate. And so in this case, if I choose to mitigate the risk, meaning that we don't get rid of the risk entirely, but we mitigate its impact by potentially, I'm working with that other project manager or other project leader to say, is there a way that we can offset these schedules a little bit? Maybe is there another resource that project could take on or that we could take on? And in that case, we wouldn't even be mitigating. We could potentially be avoiding the risk altogether. So it's looking at all of those options that were illustrated of avoiding, mitigating, transferring, and accepting, and seeing which makes the most sense. Now, the gut reaction may be to avoid risks altogether, but in the real world, avoiding risk can be very costly, meaning in this case, to avoid the risk entirely for this project, it would be to have a resource that is only staffed on this project, which implies that we have a budget that will allow for us to have one sole resource on this project and not also allocate that resource to other projects. I haven't seen that be likely where resources are working on one project. So in this example, I would probably take on the risk response of mitigating it. And like I said, working with that project manager to see how we can change things up on either of our projects to allow for this risk to be decreased in its severity. This was a video answering the question, how do you perform a risk assessment? I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, and I will talk to you all in the next video.